Hello there, you're watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. In the next half hour, we'll see what's making the headlines with the podcaster and journalist Lesley Riddoch and the Conservative commentator Tim Montgomerie. So let's see what's on some of those front pages now. The Mail dubs the de-escalation of tensions between French fishing boats and Royal Navy ships off Jersey "Le Grand Surrender." The Metro describes events in the Channel with the headline "Smash and Crab." While the Sun says simply, "Take Sprat." The Guardian reports on a research study which concluded that the government needs to spend over £100 billion to rebuild the NHS after the pandemic. The Financial Times leads with the Bank of England's forecast that 2021 will see the strongest economic growth since the Second World War. The Telegraph reports that the Prime Minister intends to go against the advice of teaching unions and overturn the rule that pupils must wear masks in classrooms. And the Eye reports on travel firms offering reduced-priced COVID testing kits in the hope of making foreign holidays easier. And we're joined tonight by Lesley Riddoch and Tim Montgomerie. Good evening to both of you. We're going to kick off as the polls have now closed. Counting is underway with the Metro and its coverage of the elections. Get set for Fallout Friday, and I'm going to have to try really hard to say this properly. So who will get a kick in the ballots? Who's it going to be, Tim?
Well, we're looking at the papers tonight, of course, Sarah, as we do it traditionally at this time on Sky. But probably the most interesting thing we could be doing at the moment is following the Twitter accounts of Beth Rigby and Sam Coates, the Sky political team, because they're giving us the early indication of what the parties internally think the results might be. Now, the results are going to be spread over 3 days, and the first result, I think, is going to be the Hartlepool by-election, which, of course, Labour desperately wanted to hold. But looking from what Sam and Beth are tweeting, Labour are expecting very difficult night, particularly in the northeast. Not only does it look like they might lose Hartlepool, once a stronghold seat for them, but they could lose Durham and Sunderland councils as well. So this is supposedly Keir Starmer's first big attempt to claw back the Tory wins in the so-called red wall seats. But it doesn't look like, if these indications are true, that it's going to be a very good night for the Labour leader. I suppose there will then, of course, be the focus on Scotland. That is probably the other big story of these elections. And the big question, which Lesley may be a better place to answer, does Nicola Sturgeon get the majority she hopes for so that she can press Boris to have the independence referendum?
Yeah, Nicola Sturgeon photographed on page 3 of the Metro, which has all of the various leaders going out to cast their votes and to get others to cast their votes as well. Lesley, Scotland, very significant in terms of the Constitution, what it means for the rest of the United Kingdom.
Well, yes, and very striking how really, if England is becoming, fairly consistently Tory, Scotland is becoming, by the looks of it, very solidly SNP. I know everybody kind of cringes with horror at having any explanation of Scotland's voting system, but it's actually some first-past-the-post seats and then a second list system that tries to rectify the imbalances created by the first past the post. So it looks as if the SNP will win almost all their seats in that first past the post section. They need to get 65 overall, and it looks like the latest polls are suggesting they will get that. If they don't, the Greens look likely to have their best election, and the combination would certainly give it pro-independence majority. So in that sense, just to hand the ball back across the court, Tim Montgomerie might be best placed to say whether Boris Johnson is going to actually face reality and recognise that this constitutes a mandate.
You two don't need me, Tim.
Well, Lesley, of course, is right. It may be a very good 24 hours for Boris Johnson, celebrating the discomfort of Labour. And that will go on into the weekend because we've already seen the Labour left potentially gunning for Keir Starmer. But Boris's big question will be, if Nicola Sturgeon gets a majority, there's going to be huge pressure on him to grant the Scottish people a second referendum. And up until now, he's resisted that hugely. But the moral pressure will be huge. And you've already had people like John Major, the former Conservative Prime Minister, saying that if Nicola Sturgeon wins the majority, then Boris Johnson should grant that referendum. So it won't just be pressure coming from the SNP, it could be pressure coming from with his own party to grant the Scottish people the second referendum in just a few years.
Yeah, we're not going to get Scotland's result overnight, but we will get the Hartlepool one expected in the early hours of the morning. But as you were saying, Tim, Beth Rigby being told by her sources that the Tories are confident there on the ground that they've won it. Let's move on to the other main story in the papers today, and Jersey. And the Mail, the headline, Le Grand Surrender, French fishermen executing a familiar manoeuvre, Tim.
Yes, and it's been a ridiculous day in many ways, hasn't it? With the French and the British all sabre-rattling in different ways. And it's dangerous for everyone involved, really. The Mail's front page talks about the next thing that the French trawlers could do would be blockade Calais to stop British exports of all kinds getting to France. And so we really do need some cool heads in this dispute. Now, it was understandable that the British sent a couple of frigates to Jersey to try and avoid a blockade of Jersey. But overall, we need some cooler heads. And at the moment, they seem to be in short supply. Let's hope the agitation that we saw today was partly due to electioneering, and maybe people will cool down in the days ahead. I certainly hope so.
Yeah, I mean, the headline writers have certainly been having some fun. Smash and crab in the Metro. Take sprat is the headline on the front of The Sun. But some of the language around this, Lesley, talking about being close to war, a new Battle of Trafalgar, Boris Johnson's Falklands moment, and an invasion. I mean, it's not exactly been cool heads and a call for calm.
No, it's not. And I mean, it's predictable, perhaps, and it seems to be part of a role. When you look at a couple of the papers, they've actually got this. They've got the Bank of England's prediction about growth in the economy. They've got the news that we'll come on to about the green list opening up and people having holidays. And it's all a sort of bish, bash, bosh, we're on a roll. And it seems a very kind of pro-Boris sort of feel, the whole thing. And of course, not a coincidence that this all happens on election day. But, when you read into some of the detail, particularly with the Financial Times, it has a very sober analysis of the whole thing, calling for an end to posturing and more pragmatism. You've got to see that, I mean, the Jersey fishermen themselves, very calm people who point out that they have, like many fishermen across the whole of Britain, been pretty roundly stuffed by the Brexit arrangements and deal that has happened, and that they're the ones who've suffered for the first 6 months, not the French fishermen. The French, of course, being very prone to having extraordinarily robust demonstrations, and as far as one can see, having practically no coverage in the French press whatsoever of this, because this is not a big deal for them.
Tim, can I ask you briefly about the timing of this in terms of domestic politics? I mean, it played well, didn't it, for Boris Johnson and Emmanuel Macron domestically to be seen to be playing tough?
Yes, and of course we're looking at it through a British prism, but there are polls now suggesting that Emmanuel Macron, if he was to go to the final stage of the French presidential election against Marine Le Pen, the leader of the far right, she could actually win. And so there is a real need for Macron, the French president, to also show that he's sticking up for French interests. So, yes, we can look at Boris's motivations, but there are political factors at play in France very much too.
OK, Lesley, Tim, for now, thank you very much. We're going to take a short break, but coming up, Boris Johnson looks set to overrule teaching unions' advice on masks in classrooms. We'll be discussing that next.
I think it was the right decision for Facebook to take Donald Trump off the platform. In fact, I think they took this action way too late. Donald Trump was a serial spreader of hate, lies, and violence over Facebook and other social media platforms. He regularly violated Facebook's community guidelines. He was given a pass time and again because he was the president of the United States. And finally, on January 7th, he was temporarily suspended from Facebook. The oversight board yesterday upheld that suspension, but kicked the ultimate decision about whether the ban should be permanent back to Facebook itself. I wish they would have just taken him down once and for all. Now's the time, but here we are. The oversight board said that Facebook had shirked its responsibility when it refused to just ban Trump itself, kicking it over to this board with a set of fairly illusory powers. So, you know, I believe that Facebook shouldn't have platformed Trump long ago. It's made exception after exception. And we know that powerful leaders like Donald Trump, Bolsonaro, Modi have used Facebook to exploit and abuse their citizenry. It's important that Facebook takes a stand here and ensures that world leaders cannot use its platform for authoritarianism and to abuse their citizens. So Donald Trump still has freedom of speech. He started his own website this week. He's, put out a statement that has gotten a ton of press attention. He is welcome to start his own website, welcome to start his own social media platform, but he does not have the power to have reach on a platform that he uses for violence, for abuse, to spread racism, to spread lies about the pandemic and the vaccine, and so forth. He doesn't have that right. That's a privilege.
Hello, my name is Ina Braverman and I'm the founder and CEO of EcoWave Power. I believe that wave power, which can produce twice the amount of electricity that the world produces now, is definitely a great cause.
I grew up seeing the impacts of climate change firsthand. Having to be afraid of drowning in my own bedroom and sometimes waking up in the middle of the night with floodwater in my room. We needed an organization that specifically talked about the climate. And so me and my friends, we decided to put up Youth Advocates for Climate Action Philippines. I had to join the fight.
Welcome back. You're watching the press preview. With me now, Lesley Riddoch and Tim Montgomerie. We're going to turn to the front of the Daily Telegraph. It has a story that masks for children in classrooms will be coming to an end, Lesley.
Yes, it's interesting. They're forecasting that on Monday, Boris Johnson will change the guidance for England and advise that masks no longer need to be worn from the 17th of May by secondary school pupils. And there's quite a lot in the article of kind of criticism of the National Education Union and quotes from some of its members saying they feel that continuing to wear the masks is crazy when it'll be possible for those same people to be mixing indoors from that date with other people without wearing masks. However, there was a couple of days ago a big letter that was signed by scientists, by 5 trade unions, by Public Health England experts, by parents, by independent SAGE, all calling for masks to stay, partly because there's been a wee rise in COVID infections since schools went back, but mostly because there's no plans to lift mask restrictions in places like public transport or in shops where people spend less time together. So there's other points you could make with this, but clearly that's not the point that's being made. There's a big push here for Boris to take on the unions and it feels like a very politically driven article and move by Boris Johnson if it comes off.
May the 17th, Tim, also the date when travel will start to cautiously open up again. The Eye says cheap tests will be offered for British travellers. The costs of PCR tests have been seen as one of the big deterrents for getting the travel industry going again.
Yeah, some of the costs that families have had to pay for tests coming into the UK or leaving have been extraordinary, really making the possibility of a family holiday. Or, you know, of course, lots of people use travel to go and meet their families. You know, lots of British families have families abroad. So it's not just a question of holiday, it's about keeping in touch with your loved ones. And so the costs of these COVID tests have been prohibitive. And so that's the good news. In another paper, The Telegraph, though, it talks about some of the flight prices to countries like Portugal, which may be one of the favoured countries in the new regime, doubling. So you gain on the swings and lose on the roundabout, really, with these changes in the cost of COVID, if you like.
Yeah, as you say, those flight prices taking off with speculation that we're going to get that green list within the coming days. Tim, Lesley, for now, thanks very much indeed for taking us through the front pages.